These urban areas directly affect how much transit funding that public transit agencies receive. And the worry was that the Boston urbanized area was going to creep up into New Hampshire and merge with some of the smaller urbanized areas like Portsmouth and Dover, Rochester. And if that were to happen, Coast would have been operating in a large urbanized area, which would have decreased the amount of funding that they would have received. In August, I believe it was August 24th, the Census Bureau released their final criteria for developing their urbanized areas, and we were pleased to see that they are trying to preserve the urbanized areas from 2000. So they're going to try to avoid at all costs those big urban agglomerations, these large urbanized areas that really aren't useful for planning purposes anyway. You think of statistical areas like census tracts and census blocks. It's a small area. You can really analyze the data within it, but when you have this large urbanized area, it's like, okay, what use is that for planning? So keeping these statistical areas smaller will not only be a good thing for planning, but also for agencies like Coast who rely on these areas to remain small so that they can keep their funding levels as is, which aren't very much to begin with. So we're hopeful that Boston does not creep up into New Hampshire here and merge with the urbanized areas in our region. So we'll be keeping an eye on that. The data should be released in the spring of next year, which is better than their original schedule of the fall of next year, so we'll push that up, so we're excited about that. Hopefully we get some good information from the Census Bureau once they release those final urbanized areas. Moving on, we're also doing quite a bit of work with our travel demand model. Right now we are in the process of setting up a contract with Resource System Group out of Vermont to update our base year, which is basically our initial year for doing model runs in the model. Right now it's currently calibrated for 2000 using 2000 census data. We're going to update that to 2010, so we're using all the latest planning assumptions, population, housing units, all that type of stuff. I'm also working on a build-out analysis, regional build-out, to update the land use allocation module, which basically helps to assume or predict future land use assumptions, like how many housing units there can be in this transportation analysis zone. It's basically a much needed update to the model that Federal Highways themselves recommended we do through our federal planning review. So we're going ahead with that, and hopefully we have a nice up-to-date model. Probably sometime in the middle of next year we should have covered some good ground on that. Let's see. Also, what Cynthia was talking about earlier, how the interns collected culvert data this summer. We have full inventories for the communities of Barrington, Madbury, Newmarket, and Rollinsford. We also started work in Somersworth, but we weren't able to finish up Somersworth before the interns left, so we'll be continuing that effort next year. Moving forward, we are working on reports to summarize the data that we collected, but we're also waiting on the New Hampshire Geological Survey to review the databases, make sure that we've covered all the attributes they wanted correctly, put all the data correctly. So once they review all those data sets, we will wrap up those reports and get that information out to communities as soon as possible so that they can start assessing some of their culverts, bridges, some of the smaller bridges, make sure that they're able to handle a lot of this increased water and runoff that we've been having in recent years. So hopefully we can avoid future road washouts and property damage and other safety concerns.
And we're the only RPC in the state right now doing this, so it's really something that's important with the severe storm events we've been having and the blowouts of the bridges and the culverts. Particularly, I know you over in Barrington, you suffered quite a bit in 06, 07, and again in 10. So this is really important to have this information and keep it current so that you can work with FEMA in your town and get things into CIP and work with DOT and the road agent. So it's very valuable information.
And just one more thing, and just other than wrapping up Summersworth next year, we don't have certain communities in mind. So if your community is really interested in this and getting their hands on this data, please let me know. We can schedule you for next summer so that you can get that data as soon as possible. So just let me know if it's of interest to you, and we can get you on the schedule.
We're also sharing this data with pretty much any interested groups once it's approved by Geological Survey, but UNH Stormwater Research Center is one of the groups that is interested in looking into this. I think it's pretty helpful for them. They do a lot of work with 50, 100, 200-year flooding events, and I think they help write standards for best practices when, for hazard mitigation plans or other things like that. So.
And the District 6.
And District 6, working with them so we're not duplicating efforts to have that inventory.
Okay. Did I cut anybody off there?
Nope, that's all I have.
Okay. Mark, anything further on project updates? Or
just one last thing. I believe it's because of the funding uncertainty. The New Hampshire statewide rail plan public hearings, there were 3 of them. One was in Portsmouth for October 6th, I believe. They have been delayed until early 2012, so I'm guessing we'll hear from DOT at that point about when they're going to be rescheduled. Make sure to get the information out. But there is no meeting on October 6th for the statewide rail plan in Portsmouth.
thank you. Okay. If that finishes project updates, we'll move on to other business.
Yeah, as you can see, we're really busy with the GASA and getting some of these other projects, the park and ride started. So in our scope of work for the next 2 years, we have a sort of convening a group for the I-95 corridor, which is really important. We're not directly on it, but we're on the Spalding Turnpike, which is a major feeder into the I-95 corridor. So we'll be convening the MPOs and other interested parties like the turnpikes to talk about issues such as the traffic backups on the bridge coming south out of Maine on the holiday and summer weekends. And again, also in the second half of our year, starting in January 2012, we'll be starting to work on the Salmon Falls corridor, working on that and the Redless Bridge projects over there, the issues with the connectivity between Maine and New Hampshire. And we're still moving along with the Scenic Highways project, so that's all I have.
I have a brief comment, if I may. I would just like to thank Kyle Pimentel for giving his presentation to the Dover Planning Board this past Tuesday night. It was educational and informative and relatively brief, but you did a good job.
Thank you.
Thanks.
That's all.
Okay. Tom?
Thank you. I have sort of 2 things to discuss that have to do with air quality. That's why I'm here. One, 2 weeks ago today, the White House announced that it was going to delay any action on the ozone standard. Those are sort of in the know. The ozone standard determines where the non-attainment areas are in New Hampshire, and they're through that process determines air quality conformity requirements. To back up a little bit, in 2008, the standard was proposed to be 75 parts per billion. The standard was immediately challenged by both environmentalists who said it was too high and business interests who said it was too low. The action on that was stayed. The EPA had announced over a year ago that they were going to set the standard somewhere between 60 and 70 and parts per billion, and had sort of 3 time periods in which they were going to do that. The last one expired at the end of July. They basically announced that they were going to do something else, and that something else was announced 2 weeks ago. The Clean Air Act requires that on a 5-year basis, every standard is reviewed and is looked at anew with regard to scientific data that might be obtained over that period. For ozone, that scientific review period started in 2008 and will be completed in 2013. And so the Obama administration has instructed the EPA to wait until that assessment is completed before they set the next ambient air quality standard for ozone. So we were bracing at DES to prepare new non-attainment area maps based on what we were anticipating was going to be a number released at the end of July. That effort has been put off for a while. And so there won't be any change in non-attainment areas associated with the now current 80 part per billion standard which we're implementing. In fact, DES is moving forward with demonstrating attainment of that standard. And so for a period of time we may go into what's called a maintenance budget as opposed to a non-attainment budget. It doesn't change a whole lot in terms of air quality conformity and transportation conformity analyses, but some of the workload that would have been associated with the new standard has been put off for a few years. Second, yesterday, the Joint Legislative Committee on Administrative Rules approved the adoption of DES's ENBA 1500 rules. We had sought input from the NPOs who are somewhat affected by that, as well as DOT, on these rules. They were up for readoption just because of their schedule brought them up for review. But one thing we did change in the rules was sort of to recognize the way in which communication is done amongst the agencies when we're looking at basic rules for conformity. So our rules were modified a bit to allow for more flexibility with regard to when TIP and STIP amendments are to take place in the review process. We went through this morning in terms of Amendment 3 is defined in those rules. So sharing of information in the rules right now is more sort of geared toward internet, email, that kind of thing, where the rules used to say plans would have to be presented to the various agencies. Now we just say communicated between the agencies. So those rules will become official. The revised rules will become official very shortly.
Thank you, Tom. Any other business? Mark? Dan?
I just have one observation. There were a couple of comments that were made earlier in the meeting that really struck me in terms of what we do and how we communicate, what we're involved with. It's always interesting, those of us who've been involved with this for a long time, there are things that seem so clear and obvious to us that where action is taken in the general public environment, is inconsistent. And I